So, looking forward to diving into yet another lightning lesson in our series. For those of you who don't know, this is a three-part series delving into the different stages of the generative AI integration pipeline. And this is actually our last session in this series prior to starting our actual course on the matter. If you missed the other ones, not to worry, I'll be sending a follow-up email with recordings to all the previous sessions along with a bunch of other resources and more information about the course. As we go, I really encourage you to drop in questions to the chat as I go. It makes my life easier to figure out what engages people. But don't take it personally if I decide to leave them hanging until the end of the course. It's nothing personal. I'm just doing it in the interest of time. If the clock is merciful upon me, I'll be happy to answer them as they go. Also, Jeremy, my colleague here, might jump in and answer them in the chat if they are answerable within that breadth. And so yeah, about who and where from. So very quickly about us, just so we know that we're legit. My name is Lev. I'm joined here by my colleague Jeremy, and we are the founders of Handshake, which is a generative AI consultancy and software studios. We build custom AI platforms for companies. They're very high emphasis on the custom. Our work often involves as much consulting and discovery as they do actually building software, because we try to uncover the unconscious and the unofficial processes of a company and imprint that onto the AI app more so than the explicit methodologies that they bear down on, because this is what makes applications unique and competitive in the exponentially growing market of AI applications. And this theme will reflect much of our conversation today, and it's the driving theme of our upcoming course, which is on scaling institutional knowledge and business intelligence with generative AI. What we do is we try to empower and scale knowledge craft. And what I mean by this term is like the methods, interactions, and thinking processes within your organization that it employs in order to get from some raw data to insights that your users, your clients value and that has market value. So we'll be learning how to fuel your proprietary methodology in crunching down data, and how you arrive at insights. We'll be empowering that within generative AI tools in order to arrive at the same insights in an automated way. And that allows amazing opportunities for scaling and uncovering new opportunities. And it also makes the generative AI app you create uniquely yours. Only you could have created something like it, because only your unique company's fingerprint is informing how it behaves. And what you'll be getting in the next 30 minutes is a slice of this conversion magic. But unlike today's session, the course will actually be way more of an armchair strategizing. Half the class is actually hands-on development of these workflows with lots of support from us, unlimited support. In fact, we do everything to make sure you walk away with a prototype, very personalized, that engages with knowledge and generates insights the way you do it and nobody else does. So that's my plug. Thank you for indulging me. More in the course at the end of the session. But now let's talk about a specific element of this knowledge craft amplification. And what I'm talking about is the language user interface, or the language user experience. And I'll define what the term means in a second. But for now, let's talk about the pain point we're trying to address. The thing is, when you build a generative AI product and call it your own, it's not just another SaaS product. It's not traditional software. The chatbot can talk, it can converse, and I know I'm not breaking any ground here. What is groundbreaking and not very obvious is because it can talk and engage with users, users don't treat it like software. They treat it like your representative. They feel like they call your organization and someone picked up the phone. And the user don't just think, oh, this is a good or bad product. The psychological impression is completely different. It imparts judgment on your organization as a whole. And if your generative AI app misbehaves, they're left with the impression as if he called your sales rep and he started hallucinating, which is not a good look. So in order to avoid the risk of damaging your image in a major way, you need to engage in a new art, the art of tweaking this producer of dynamic language. And historically, this is something we never had to do before. It is nothing like copy editing an existing blog post or a piece of writing where you cross out individual words and just polish the text, because the process is dynamic. Ask the model the same question twice, and you'll likely get very different answers. So you have to make changes on a more global level. You can't just make minute word-specific changes. You have to inform it more like you would guide an intern. As in, you see them doing something and they kind of do it differently every time, but you see general themes and you know what themes are working and which are not, and you're kind of like guiding it on how to become better. So now we're ready to answer what is LUX. It's the style and tone. It's the language experience, the language, the way the user experiences the language with which the model communicates. So yes, primarily that is style and tone in which the model speaks, but to some degree, it's also the logic it uses and how to respond to the user's needs. It's the attitude it takes to the user, and ultimately the relationship the model builds with the user. All of these fall under the cap of LUX. And this is something you can modify either through prompt engineering or in the way you design the AI app more generally. And if you don't consciously orchestrate the LUX, it will become generic at best and misinforming at worst, which completely undermines your company's credibility. So, sounds like a lot, right? I have a degree and a master's of science in psychology, so trust me, I'll be the last to underestimate just how expansive and multifarious this subject matter is. You're answering questions, something like, includes questions like, how do you want the model to speak? Do you want it to sound like a kind grandma or like a robot? When will a model refuse to respond to questions? How much do you want the model to extrapolate from raw facts? All of these are questions shaping the language user experience. So here's a bare bones example to really drive the definition of LUX home. Suppose a user asks a model to talk like a cat. All of these outputs I'm showing you are technically correct responses. It could respond, ha, yeah, I'm an AI language model, so I can't actually be a cat. However, I can answer questions about cats. Let me know how I can help you. Technically correct. It could also say, all right, I'm a cat now. How can I assist you in your perfect day? I cringe every time I get to this part of the presentation. Or it could say, meow, 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 meow. In all cases, the model is understanding a task and responding correctly, but your user will want only one of these, and the user doesn't want to explicitly specify which one of these it wants. So it's up to you to guesstimate, to suss out which pathway of the language experience the user wants and deliver that. And this may seem like a purely psychological factor, but actually goes beyond the emotional reaction. It actually shapes the very expectations the user has of your app. An anecdote to portray this, back in the day, way back in the day, in the Stone Age of 2014, Apple just released Siri, one of the first voice interacting bots where you could speak to your iPhone and it'll respond with this voice in real time, addressing whatever you wanted. Well, when they first created the service, they deliberately chose it to sound robotic because in previous tests, when they made Siri sound human, the user began engaging with it like a person and began to expect for it to be as proficient at addressing their needs as a person. So their expectations were way blown up beyond what the rudimentary Siri of 2014 could do. But when they made it sound like a robot, people's expectations unconsciously dropped and the satisfaction from the app rose. So they intentionally injected this robotic-like voice in order to guide the user expectations properly. So if I didn't get the drive a home point yet, how important is this LUX element in the success of your AI application? It's the deal breaker. And the history of OpenAI really reflects that. Back in the day, it kind of when OpenAI first came out, it had all these toggles. It spoke in a very clunky way, and the experience was just very developer focused. Without changing much about the model, just with some prompting instructions and really stripping down the interaction window, it went from a niche development tool to the fastest growing app in-app history. On the other hand, we have Bing, which neglected the LUX completely and let the model insult and argue with its users, and now it basically disappeared from history, just like its cousin Internet Explorer. So another medal for Microsoft. Again, don't hesitate to throw questions in the chat as I'm going through this. I know I'm going a million miles an hour. Please feel free to slow me down, stop me, let us hang in on a subject matter that's particularly interesting to you. And I can assure you I'll be here for an unlimited time after our 30-minute session in order to do Q&A and dig deeper. I have plenty of material beyond what I could fit in these 30 minutes. Okay, so like LUX is important. So how do you get it right? How do you align user expectations with model behavior? Well, the first thing to notice is this is not a problem with typical bugs that you expect from traditional software. Bugs are behaviors that developers don't want and the user doesn't want. But because this is a psychological game, because this model engages and speaks in a diverse way, it could just as well be the case that the developers did want a specific experience, but the users didn't. So for example, there's a road trip building tool that was being developed that we consulted on the development process. And from there, I want to pull an example where the AI system, the app, might be asked by the user to create beautiful coastal drive itinerary because it's a road trip planning tool. So the model gives back a road trip map with points to visit, which are it considers ideal beach vacation points. But the implicit and unstated assumption is that because it's a beach vacation, the user actually would want destinations where they could relax on the sand and not just spend hours behind the dashboard of their car looking at a beach which is nothing but cliff face and rocks. Of course, nobody would instruct that explicitly, but it's an assumed expectation. So the model is kind of like a genie which satisfies all your wishes, but sometimes messes it up because it understood you too literally. And it's the responsibility is on you as a developer to take it that extra mile and suss out the unstated and implicit desires of the user on their behalf. A more exciting issue or bug or whatever you might call it with AI apps, but again, does not arise as much with traditional software, is situations where the developers didn't intend to satisfy user need, some kind of user need, but the users ended up satisfying it anyways, because large language models are open-ended, meaning they're universal by default. If you go to ChatGPT, ask it any question, most likely you'll get an answer. And it will satisfy the user's goals unless you explicitly tell it to not satisfy those kind of goals. So again, from like a road trip planning example, imagine the user asks for marijuana dispensaries as points of attraction of their AI road trip planning tool through California, Oregon, or whatever. And because the model just pulls information from Google Maps, it'll do it. Like there's nothing stopping it from doing it unless you tell it not to. Okay, but is this something you wanted? Is this something you expected? Does your company bode well with that as a notion? What if a minor uses your tool? Okay, so now you're in a hairy legal situation, and so on. These are not bugs that you can solve, that you can dig down into the code, find a specific area that's causing a problem, and get rid of it. The more general point is that in order to figure out what is right for your audience, your basis of truth is people who know your audience and the data that the model is working on. So you have to involve content experts and target audience experts at every step of the developmental process of your AI app. You have to involve them when you first imagine what the app will and will not do. You'll have to involve them when you refine its output and when you decide how to handle unexpected use cases after the app launched. At every stage, the people that know your audience best need to be tightly involved. Again, this is kind of historically unprecedented. Subject matter experts never had to work cheek and jowl with app developers. They usually just kind of create a user vignette and we're done for the day, and then the developers took it from there. And we devote much of our course to explaining how to shape this dynamic between different teams and make it fruitful. But so how do you involve subject matter experts and user experts in the process? Well, let's start with the first part. Before you even do anything AI, you need to understand your current relationship between the content and users. So you have people on your team who write reports for your clients, or handle calls for your clients, or create the web content which your clients will visit. Well, as I said in the premise, these folks make a lot of decisions in their line of work which aren't explicitly stated. For example, you're writing a report for your client, your Deloitte or something. How much do you extrapolate from hard facts to reach an insight actually useful to a user? Is it a lot? Is it a little? Really depends on what field you're working in. And I doubt you ever sat down with your consultants or your subject matter experts and pinpointed the exact location on the spectrum of extrapolation where what level of extrapolation is acceptable. But now you have to do that, because if you don't, the model will just assume that the extrapolation is unlimited and go off the rails and might say something that is compromising. So extensive interviews, surveys, and such will be necessary. And even then, even if you really dug into the brains of your experts, you still wouldn't capture it all. So you have to create your initial prototype in a lot of ways best on your best guess on what the content experts try to convey to you and what you understand from what the user wants. Just in the shortest manner possible, whip up your minimum viable product and take it back to your experts. Again, get them involved. Our clients get pissed often because they're like, our expert's time is expensive. Like, we thought we were gonna hire you and you're just gonna make something. Like, we didn't know you're gonna just steal members of our team over and over again in order to really align it. But that is really the only way you can rate something unique and that really stands out and is truly yours and embodies your company's competitive edge in the tool. Okay, so I'm gonna skip through this on questions that you would want to ask in interviews. But to make a long story short, whatever insights you unearth from your content experts and your user experts, you document that in a product requirements document. So you start at the very high level. What is the primary objective of your bot? What is the secondary objectives? Ideally, it has one primary, 3 to 4 secondaries. Each of these, based on what you unearth in your discovery process, would have an example or points of consideration or specifiers that what the tone should be, what the length should be. So an example for like a primary use case. So you could say for a primary use case, the response, so you have some primary use case like it gives donation advice. For that primary use case, the response will be long enough to completely answer user questions. It will not use technical jargon. It will explain things like to a 5th grader, but it'll still be short enough that it'll be readable for a user in the context of a chat conversation. And the user should have the ability to indicate that they want more detail if the original answer is too short. So this is like a snippet that would end up in your PRD. Notice just how much detail and how much depth that goes into. Nothing is left assumed. Another thing this PRD should do is, as I said, like with the marijuana issue, things that your bot should not do. And how hard that not is. Never talk about marijuana. Only mention dispensaries if asked for directly, or immediately report them to the DARE program or something. This is a good time to sit down with execs and really flesh out where you sit on the numerous sensitive subjects, because it's all game now. And like traditional software, any subject matter should be considered. And better do that now when you're creating the bot, as opposed to when your legal team comes home and says there's a lawsuit because, I don't know, the model like called it the Gulf of Mexico instead of Gulf of America or something. Let's see. Let me see what questions we have in the chat. Isn't AI evals the main way to achieve this? Yes, absolutely. But notice that AI evals work with something that already existed. They're a retroactive method for evaluation, and we will get to it. But you will really be shooting yourself in the leg if you wait till AI evals in order to start aligning with the user. You really want to set the stage already discovering and asking questions as opposed to assuming answers and then seeing if they're right or not. But great question. Please keep them coming. Okay, so let's time lapse and suppose you did all of that. How would you test that your instructions and guardrails actually work? Because again, fun element of generative AI apps, instructing a model to do or not do something does not guarantee in any way that those instructions will be followed or that they will be followed in the way you intended to. Well, there are a few methods for doing this, and I'll cover only one for now. There's also more organic methods like red teaming, which is asking your trusted inner circle to try to make it say something embarrassing and then adding instructions not to do that. But I like this method because it's more scalable and it's probably something you'll be doing a lot. So what you do is, again, sit down with your experts and create a baseline of 20 questions you would expect the user to be asking of your app. Then you create an MVP and you throw those 20 questions at the model one by one. And you collect the answer and you document them. Again, you sit down with the experts, look at the responses, ask them, is this the answer right? And even if it's a true or false question, there's a lot of nuance with like word choice and tone, and just the minutia which only someone dedicated to the field or dedicated to the user would pick up on and say, yes, this is factually right, but tonally off, or vice versa. And so, okay, so you throw these 20 questions at the app you made. You collect the answers. This is your baseline. This is your MVP initial response. Then your content experts give you some feedback. You make some changes to your app. You make some changes to your prompt instructions or any other element or your underlying data set. Well, the trick is you can't just check if that one element was properly adhered to, because AI models are an embodied thing, which means changing one thing about its behavior can change a lot of things about a lot of other behavior. This is way more noticeable in image generators, where whenever you ask to convey a different mood while keeping all the other instructions exactly the same, it'll generate a completely different image. Well, with text, this is absolutely still true, and it's even worse because it's in a more subtle way. So you'd want to run these 20 questions every time you make any change whatsoever. And I just picked 20 because it's an easier scope, but you could make 100 if you want to go through the effort. Okay, so you run these 20 questions through version A, which is the minimum viable product, made an update, compiled a similar list, and called it version B. Then I send the model these instructions. Give it general context. You're evaluating, so you're telling it, you're evaluating outputs of an app intended to do so-and-so for this and that user audience. And you're evaluating 2 versions. Okay, provided those 2 versions. And notice I'm not letting it know that one version is old or new or better or worse. This is a blind test for the model. Then I ask the model to evaluate the response based on concrete criteria. Again, the experts are the best positioned to identify and describe these criteria. These are just an example. I like a percentage distribution so the model knows which one's more important. But things I could choose to focus on are like strategic value and insight. So like which response gave more insight. This is supposing, I think I used this for like future forecasting or the kind of strategic guidance app that we created. So of course, strategic value was of importance. Also relevance and context. The answer, was it relevant to the question asked? And finally, response quality. So this is tone, clarity, flow, readability, all those other elements. And then I tell the model, okay, so for rank the questions one by one. Provide a key difference on how the response was different for each of these versions. And assign it a comparative score of either, if it's version A is better, it's a +2. If it's slightly better, it's +1. If there's no meaningful change, give it a 0. If version B is better, give it a -1 or a -2. And then I ask it to run question by question and repeat this process over and over and over again. And only then, after it ran them all one by one, I ask it to crunch all the numbers down in a table and then provide me with a final conclusion and a final report. And after the first 2 times doing this, I assure you, you'll only be reading the final report because it's just a buttload of text to read through. But you don't want to skip through those steps because it will make the model more objective in its analysis, and you can kind of reverse engineer and how it reaches a conclusion and make sure that you agree with its logic. I see we had some uh, some responses in the chat. Observability and guardrails would also be an important part post-prompt design, launching an MVP. Yes, absolutely. Everything is ongoing. These could happen at the very beginning. These should also happen in the development process, and should continue happening after you launched and see the user responses. So it's absolutely an ongoing process. Okay, so after doing that lots and lots of times, you're ready to launch. Yay! I feel like I'm not making this sound fun for some reason, but it actually is fun. At least I enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it too. Because you get to see like how it's kind of like psychology, you know, you get to see how tweaking one thing in the model's attitude changes his worldview and cosmology in general. And you kind of like are playing with this extremely complex system. Way funner than coding for me personally. I'm sure someone will thoroughly disagree with me. Okay, so this is a really abridged version on what you could do once you launched it and you're starting to get user feedback. First of all, obviously start collecting user experiences. Even better if it records. It gives each user a unique ID. This is only possible if they have a login process initially. Even better if it records the entire conversation they had and kind of clumps it together with past conversations they had, so you can watch the entire relationship development between the user and the tool. Even better if it develops, it pinpoints their location and so on and so forth. The more data, the better. Just collect all the data that you can from your user and how they engage with the app. Once you got a solid batch of at least a few hundred interactions, you can do some elementary and easily accessible analysis. So like you could do it without any coding or anything. The most straightforward approach nowadays is just to upload all that information onto like Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, explain which column is which, and ask for some direct questions. So like concrete questions like, were there any unusual use cases that did not fit with what the model was intended for? Are there any uses which clearly portray a user's frustrations? Models are really good at picking up at the underlying sentiment behind words and figuring out if the user was pissed off or not. Were there responses that obviously did not answer the question and just misunderstood? Concrete questions, so I'm not asking for themes, I'm asking for pinpoint locations where something happened right or wrong. Models are really good at just looking through each question, even if there's hundreds of them, and picking out when something unique happened. What they're not as good at out of the box is like picking out themes. So like, what are the major themes across the use cases? For that, you need more structured Python software from GitHub. They're totally open source. You just need to know a little bit of coding. They still involve large language models, so they're still very sentiment and reasoning based. But what you arrive at is something more rich and a global view of your entire user interaction data set. So like, what languages were used? In a specific language, what were the themes for that language? Or if it's a family-oriented kind of interaction, obviously, what were the family folks more interested in? Things like that. Again, we delve deeper into this in our course. But in the last minute, I want to leave you with an inspiring note that this is a very unexplored terrain. We're in what is called the horseless carriage kind of thinking, where when they first invented cars, they just created a carriage that just had an engine in it because they couldn't imagine anything, and it was a long way from like what we know as cars today. We're kind of in the same era with generative AI. We kind of just like took old tools and slapped AI in it, but there's so much to be explored and so many tools for generative AI that we didn't even think of. And the inspiring part is you, not us, the AI experts, you as the experts within your domain and field are best fitted to uncover these new use cases. Just like a bunch of college kids were best suited to invent YouTube than Google ever was, so you within your specific subfield are best suited to align the model to your client's needs. So again, we're going way deeper on this in our course, but I want to give you permission to leave and also open the floor for discussion and Q&A. Please ask away. I really love a more conversational kind of format anyways. So anything about what I was talking about piqued your interest or you have questions on? I see some recommendations of open code and axial coding, um, like braintrust.dev. I haven't heard of that one um, for examining traces. Thanks for that recommendation. I'm going to check that out. I've tested a couple of them, but haven't heard of that one specifically.